I guess it's time to do it. Have you ever thought about the first game you ever played? Or at least the first game that you remember playing in your life? Well, I don't know about you, but for me those memories are kinda blurred, since I played some titles in the same period of time in my life, when I was like 6 or 7 years old. One thing that's for sure though, is that it was all on the same console, which I can also safely say was my first console that I play games on, the PlayStation. But again, I remember my first games being a couple titles, although I cannot tell you specifically which one was the first one, cause I can't even remember. In fact, I think it would be very rare that someone remembers the first game they ever played. If anything, they will tell you the first game they remember playing. Now, if I had to answer that question myself, it would be definitely a Crash Bandicoot game. To be specific, it would be Crash Team Racing, which was not only one of the games that introduced me to the fascinating world of video games, but also to the Crash Bandicoot franchise, which, if you didn't know, is my personal favorite franchise. And while I may not like some of the games in it, or even coming back to the old games all the time as I will get sick of them, I certainly do love playing Crash games every now and then. And to be quite honest, they still hold up to this day. Well, at least some of them. So that's why I thought it would be a good idea to talk about Crash Bandicoot at some point in my channel. But instead of doing a standalone review of one of the PS1 games, I decided to play them all, record gameplay of them, review them one by one, and finally rank them in a tier list fashion. I should mention though, that not all of the gameplay is gonna be mine, as I haven't completed all of the games in max percentage. So I'll also be using gameplay from other channels that of course I will credit. And you gotta understand that completing a couple of these games in their max percentage will have made making this video a living nightmare, so I hope you can understand this. Thank you very much. But yeah, basically I wanted to do this because I knew deep down in my heart that I had to do a PS1 Crash Bandicoot video at some point. And what's better than summarizing my thoughts on all of the games and, of course, letting you know which ones I like the most and the least. And if you never heard of Crash Bandicoot before, I also feel like this video should be a good introduction to the franchise, since, personally, I do feel like PS1 Crash was best Crash, even if some of the games had some shitty aspects to them, but we'll get into that eventually. Anyway, let's rumble. So, this is the game where it all began, the introduction of this franchise to the world. It's the first Crash Bandicoot. And look, I'm not gonna try to sugarcoat it or anything, it is not an amazing game, at least not compared to how the franchise improved later on, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. So this game was developed by Naughty Dog, who will also make 3 more Crash Bandicoot games before leaving the franchise, which will end up in various different developers over the years, most notably Activision. Nowadays, Naughty Dog are better known for making games like the Uncharted franchise and The Last of Us, although their roots with Crash Bandicoot and also Jak and Daxter are very well remembered by fans. I sometimes even wonder how different the franchise would be if Naughty Dog kept making Crash games. Either way, back to Crash 1. This game establishes many core elements to the franchise, not only characters, but also mechanics and objects that will be recurrent to future Crash games, and as many issues as this game has, it still feels like a decent introduction if I do say so myself. The story here is that Dr. Neo Cortex, the main villain of this game and the franchise in general, decides to mutate various animals from the Wumpa Island and turn them into his army. But suddenly one of his mutations was wrong and escapes. That failed mutation, of course, is Crash Bandicoot, and in his attempt of escaping, actually throws himself off of Cortex Castle and ends up stranded on Insanity Beach, and he has to now go back and rescue his girlfriend Donna, although to be completely honest, he could have just done it right there. So he's basically just gonna go back to where he fell from in the first place, essentially. Plot aside, this game is a 3D platformer that consists of pretty much two types of stages, up-scrolling and side-scrolling. Of course, you can move in all directions when it comes to open areas in certain levels, but it doesn't really have open world levels like games such as Spyro or Croc. But it's not like that takes away much of the charm of this game, although I would really love to see an open world Crash game at some point. Make it happen, Activision, I'm watching you. In the very first level of the game, Insanity Beach, we get introduced to many of the mechanics that we will be seeing throughout the game and franchise. Crash can jump and spin to break various types of boxes, and defeat enemies as well. These boxes can contain a fruit known as Wumpa, which seems to be a combination between a mango and an apple, but it can also have Aku Aku masks that will serve as your protection in case you get hit, and invincibility when you get 3 of them. There's also checkpoint crates that will return you to the location they're in case you die, as well as bouncy boxes and iron crates that can spawn hidden boxes. There's just so many of them. Once we beat a level, there's a couple outcomes depending on how you perform in the level, and this is very important if you want to 100% the game, which is something I personally wouldn't recommend on your first play. If you get all the boxes in the level and not die, you get a gem. However, if you don't get all the crates in a level, you will not only not get the gem, but the game will actually tell you how many boxes you forgot to break. And there's also what happens if you break all the boxes, but you have died at least once in the level, in which case you just don't get the gem at all. Really scummy from the game if you ask me. There's also the fact that there are some hidden paths that are only accessible if you use colored gems as platforms. And what would you know? The only way to get those colored gems beforehand is to break boxes in specific levels. Here's the thing though, the game doesn't tell you which levels are the ones with the colored gems, so have fun figuring that out on your own, I guess. This is honestly one of my biggest issues in the game, as it makes 100% completion a nightmare, and even more considering how hard the levels get later on. But we'll get into that later because, believe me, if you end up hating some of the levels in Island 1, you won't want to hear about Island 2 or let alone Island 3. By the second level, Jungle Rollers, you get introduced to a couple new things. First, you get the TNT box, which is an explosive crate that will activate a countdown once you jump on it. And if you're reckless enough to spin it, it will just explode and cause you damage right away. Then we have the bonus icons that will lead you into a bonus round. For a good chunk of levels, this will be just Donna's face, but you'll also get Embryo and Neo Cortex bonus icons in later levels, although those are trickier to get, and there's a good reason for that actually. But yeah, the purpose of a bonus is to essentially save your current progress in the game, as you cannot just save anywhere just like that. Yet another thing I don't like or comprehend about this game, but it's not that annoying either. You can save your progress by either saving it directly in your memory card or using a password. This is actually a pretty cool thing to have for people who wanted to save their game but couldn't be arsed to buy a memory card back in the day. Nowhere to save your sacred progress in? Don't worry, all you need is paper and pencil and you're all set. It's also worth mentioning that you can save the game if you successfully get a gem at the end of a level, and the difference between the gem and bonus passwords is that the gem ones are super passwords, which really just means it's a 3-word password instead of a single one. But it has the word super! As you progress through the game, you'll encounter many more mechanics, such as being able to ride a hog, running away from a giant boulder, and even using Aku Aku masks that will serve as your guiding light in dark levels. So in terms of changing it up a little bit every once in a while, I'd say this game has done an okay job. So anyway, we also get boss fights. But instead of having a boss fight at the end of each island, the placement of the boss fights is really all over the place in this game. It almost feels like just another level if you ask me. We got Papu Papu, Ripperoo, Koala Kong, Pinstripe, Nitros Brio, and of course, Neo Cortex. All of these characters will be recurring in the franchise, by the way. Even some that only serve as bosses and we know nothing else about them end up having some sort of character development in future games. So, how about the regular levels anyway? Well, most of them are jungle based, with some also being industrial, temple and castle based, so not a lot of variety there either. I gotta say though, the levels get brutal quicker than you may think. With the first level that falls into the hard as balls category in my opinion being Native Fortress, which is a side-scrolling jungle level filled with a whole lot of obstacles, ranging from bouncy paths that can ignite fire to rim platforms with slippery physics, and even spiky traps that have kind of an unfair hitbox, and it's easy to take damage out of it if you don't time how to jump out of them right. I remember being trapped in this level as a kid for so long, and it wasn't until I played the game again years later that I could get through it without the same difficulty I felt. Still doesn't make it an easy level though, but I will say, this level was generous enough to make you go out of bounds for this specific part, where you can skip a little bit of the obstacle madness, so thank you game. Another couple levels that are really freaking hard, I would say even more than Native Fortress, are the Lost City and Sunset Vista. Both levels are filled with even harder obstacles to get past, such as walls that will push you if you don't get past them quickly, as well as bats, lizards, and platforms that appear and disappear quickly. I gotta say though, the Lost City feels like a walk in the park compared to Sunset Vista, as it's a much longer level and it feels like the obstacles are 10 times worse to get through. Now don't get me wrong, these levels are not bad, maybe unfair, but in terms of level design and making the player having to game out of their mind to get through the level, I would say both levels are actually pretty good. Now, trying to get to the end of those levels without dying to get the gem felt like an impossible challenge to me, which is one of the reasons I decided to any percent the game while recording it. Now, you may be wondering, well, it certainly cannot get worse than that, right? Oh boy, you haven't seen anything. Let me introduce you to the hardest level in the game and the bane of my existence, Slippery Climb. This level sucks! This is basically a level where you need to time your jumps right all the time because the platforms are just ruthless. They can appear and disappear quickly, rotate fast, move in weird direction patterns, and you'll even need to jump on birds. Oh, and also, the level only has one checkpoint. Yep, there's only a single checkpoint in the entirety of the longest level. Again, not bad if you're willing to sacrifice a lot of lives over and over again just to get from point A to point B and not get anything. But just remember what you need to fully complete this godforsaken game. I hate this level, honestly. A bunch of levels in this game are hard, and I have my problems with them, but this one is just flat out annoying. And it actually makes me happy that the other level that was themed like this, Stormy Ascent, didn't make it into the final game, because apparently that one was even harder than Slippery Climb. Of course, as we all know, that scrap level did get a release on the Insane Trilogy, but it's pretty much optional and for people that want a harder version of this level, aka masochists. After these couple levels, I don't really think I have any other issues with levels. I would say a couple levels I kinda dislike are probably Road to Nowhere / The High Road, and also Lights Out, but they're still tame in comparison to Slippery Climb. And as for levels I do like, I'd say the first couple ones, the Hawk levels, Cortex Power, and both Temple Ruins and Jaws of Darkness, might as well be my favorites. So anyway, you get all the way to the end of the third island, and that's where you battle Neo Cortex on top of a Zeppelin, however the heck you got there. And once you beat him, the game is over. at least in one way. You see, I kept mentioning that 100% in this is a pain in the ass through my review, but there's actually a true ending for those who decide to go for full completion. The level before Neo Cortex is a level called the Great Hall, and for the any percent players, it's as easy as just jumping to the other platform and progressing to the final boss. But for those mad people who got all the gems before getting to this level, this is actually their final level, as all you need to do is some platforming across every single gem you got, and simply get to Tona and that's it. That's the true ending. You also get a cool epilogue for what the bosses do after the game, which is totally amusing considering the fact that they mention places that actually exist in real life during said epilogue, but other than that there's not really much more. But it also felt like a lot of stuff could have been done better. As I said at the beginning, I wouldn't call it an amazing game, it's just fine. I don't hate it, but I certainly do not love it either. It has a lot of frustrating aspects and just BS going on that I'm not a fan of, but hey, maybe some people out there will love it more than I did. And with that said, I put Crash Bandicoot 1 on the D tier. Alright, now we're getting into the interesting stuff. If Crash 1 was a mediocre first impression of a franchise, then Crash 2 is the redemption arc. I love this game so much, in fact I would say it's my favorite Crash game from the trilogy, as it feels like a good balance between the mediocrity of Crash 1 and the collectathon chaos of Crash 3. Everything feels so much more organized. The characters have more personality here than in Crash 1, and even the parts that seem frustrating don't seem unfair. Well, at least not most of them. There are some cryptic parts that we'll get into in a bit. But first, we gotta talk about the way this game starts, because it starts as soon as Crash 1 ends, with Cortex being thrown off of his pad as we beat him, and him finding out about crystals, which will also become a core element and collectible item in the franchise from then on. And his plan is to fool Crash into thinking he will save the world by getting him to collect all 25 crystals, with 1 crystal per level, and 25 levels across 5 warp rooms, which replaces the islands as hub worlds. And of course, because Crash is an idiot, he believes him, and we are on our quest to get the crystals. Oh, and by the way, I should mention that Crash ends up in a warp room after her sister Coco asks him to find batteries for her laptop, in the middle of a jungle. I mean, sure, there's probably a tech store around there, Coco. Don't you also want me to buy you something from the 7-Eleven that there's totally in the jungle as well? For those who don't know Coco, she's a new character that will not only serve as our sister, but also as the new female character after Ton apparently sparkled some controversy for no apparent reason. And to be honest, she has as much popularity as Crash has, with her being a playable character in many Crash games in the future. But here, she's just kind of a secondary character. She does appear during the intro and also talk to us every now and then during our journey, so she's kinda relevant here, just not a lot. Oh, and Embryo also appears again, just not as a boss anymore, but rather as someone who was apparently betrayed by Cortex and wants revenge by us collecting all the gems in the game. And we'll get into that in a little bit because the gems work in a more lenient way this time around. Just like Crash 1, this game has up and side scrolling, but this time both Crash himself and the levels feel a lot more satisfying to get through. Crash has more responsive and tight controls. He can also now slide and do belly flops, which are cool moves, but sliding is what will do the most in order to get through the levels more quickly. In this case, we got a bunch of new level themes not present in the last game, including snow, sewer, and even space. There's of course previous themes as well, such as jungle, ruins, and river/waterfall, but they do feel significantly different than Crash 1. And just like new level themes, we also got new elements and some changes to Crash 1 elements in this game. such as the Nitro box, which is similar to the TNT box except this one explodes on contact, even if you jump on it. And the only way to break them without damage is by spinning a green iron exclamation mark rate that explodes all the nitros in a level. The bonus levels are also back, but instead of having to collect 3 face icons, you only have to find a question mark path and either fall underneath it or let it take you up to the bonus area. Unlike Crash 1, the boxes in this bonus do count for the crate gem though. Another pretty interesting thing are the gameplay mechanics. There are some that come back from Crash 1 as well as some new ones. For instance, you do ride an animal again, although instead of it being a hawk, it is now a polar bear, conveniently named Polar. And not only do you ride him on his levels, but you also do so in the chase level Unbearable, in which you run away from another bigger, angrier polar bear on your own, and later actually ride Polar in the last part of the level. There's also the jetpack levels at the very last warp room, in which Crash, as you may have figured out, uses a jetpack through the entire level. And the controls for these levels are something I never fully gotten used to. In fact, even to this day I still struggle trying to get them right, but alas, I could complete the levels in the end. I'm not a huge fan of the jetpack levels personally, but I'm gonna admit it's still a pretty cool idea for the game. Now, I wanna talk about the gems, because boy do they feel so much better to collect in this game. First of all, you can die in a level and still get the crate gem, but that's not all. Remember how getting gems and finishing bonus levels in Crash 1 was the only way of saving? Well, Crash 2 has a save/load game that you can use anytime you want. Sweet fucking Jesus, thank you. But the crate gems are, of course, not the only type of gems in the game, as the color gems also make a comeback here, and you can actually see which levels have the color gem in them. But the means to get them are not really the same as Crash 1, as in that game the color gem was the crate gem of the level we collected it from. But in this game, it is a bit more cryptic to get the color gems. Usually, you'll have to go through a secret path that you need to figure out the location of yourself, and from there look after the gem. My favorite example for this has to be the purple gem hidden in the level Behaving, in which you see a bunch of nitros stacked together and your normal thought will be to skip them, but you actually need to jump on them to get to the purple gem path. It must have been mind-blowing for anyone discovering this back in the 90s when this was released. There's also an easy way to get the red gem in Snow Go, instead of going through an entire secret path just to get it, which is to use a combination of an iron bouncy crate, sliding, spinning, and then using a belly flop to get to it. It can be pretty tricky to get it right, but it's possible. Anyway, that's it for color gems. However, there is a third type of gems, the secret ones. They look just like the normal crate ones, but these are also gotten through different methods. There's most notably 2 ways to get them. One is by getting a color gem, then unlocking a color gem path in a specific level, and said gem path will lead you to a secret gem or just some extra crates you need to get the crate gem in said level. The other way is to get through a death route area. The death route is essentially a path with a skull on it that you get, which leads you to a in which a secret gem awaits you. Even the music changes to a more upbeat, challenging one. But be careful, because if you die before the death route, it will become transparent, and you'll have to do the entire level again without dying to get there. And aside from these 2 ways, there's many other cryptic ways to get the secret gems, just like having to jump boxes floating in a river to a platform in the level Air Crash, and also go back to Polar in the bear chase level Unbearable. Needless to say, the game won't tell you that you need to do this. You'll have to figure it out yourself. And of course, now we got game guides and walkthroughs and shit to help us with this. But just imagine trying to beat this in 1997 and struggling with how cryptic getting all those gems is. Must have been a nightmare honestly, but I personally enjoyed the mystery behind those gems. And if it wasn't enough already, getting the 5 color gems serves an even bigger purpose in the final level, Spaced Out. where you encounter a special path that requires you to get all the 5 color gems, since all of them serve as platforms for the next part of said path, and in the end you get a secret gem. And I honestly think that's an amazing thing to use the color gems for. Okay, so now I wanna get into the topic of the bosses, because just like there's a couple that come back from the previous game, most of them are actually new. We got familiar faces like Reaper Roo and Neo Cortex, but as far as new characters go, we have the Komodo brothers, Joe and Mo, Tiny Tiger, and Engine, which is Cortex's new sidekick and also a cyborg. These bosses have their own mechanics and ways to be beaten, and in my opinion are way better than the bosses in Crash 1, which is also a pretty cool thing. Well, except for one boss. And which one am I talking about, you may say? I'm talking about Cortex. I swear to god, this boss battle is lame as fuck! And it's not a boss in between warp rooms or anything. This is the final boss. Like, how do you make this boss battle this lame? It takes you less than a minute, or should I say less than 30 seconds, to beat him. You just follow him around in a jetpack and attack him 3 times, and that's it. Of course, this is just a small detail, and the game overall is still amazing. But this boss battle is just lazy and half-assed. It is what it is. But yeah, you don't actually get the true ending right away, so you need to go back to the final warp room with all of the crystals and gems already collected, and then jump on the path in the middle that will show us a cutscene where Brio helps us build a laser with the collected gems that will destroy Cortex's space station, and then the end happens. I didn't hesitate to complete this game 100% when I played it, which definitely says something about it when compared to the last game. I didn't wanna complete that one because I knew it would have taken me ages. But this one, as frustrating as it got in some parts, I still really enjoyed completing it. This game not only has charm, but it also improves a lot of aspects the first game failed at, and left a good taste in my mouth. At the end of the day, this is definitely my favorite game of the original trilogy, so with that said, I will put this one on the A tier. Well, so far we got a first game that was a decent but mediocre introduction to the franchise, then a game that polished the mechanics already established and did a way better work. So what now? Well, now we get into the chaos. Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, the third game in the franchise, is a very interesting game because it's one of those cases where you take an already established formula and fill it up to the brim with more content and collectibles. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it can also get pretty overwhelming for the player. As for myself, I decided to just go with any percent again this time. There's just too much to do, as you will see. So this game starts out with the Cortex space station falling off to a random temple, which turns out is a cell that kept the evil counterpart of Aku Aku, who now speaks and has a bigger role in the game aside from just protecting us during gameplay. This evil mask is called Uka Uka. Yeah, I know, clever name. And he gets mad at Cortex for not being able to get rid of Crash Bandicoot as of now, which is why now both Uka Uka and a new villain, and Trophy, plan to gather crystals that are scattered through time, for some reason. And it's up to us now to travel through time, recover the crystals, and, of course, beat Neo Cortex. You know the drill by now. So step aside, Chrono Trigger, it's time for the better time traveling video game to start. So yeah, as the plot implies, this is your usual Crash Bandicoot game, but it's also a time traveling game, which means we get to go through brand new areas such as the medieval, prehistoric, Chinese, pirate, Arabian, Egyptian, and future times. This is also the first time we play as Coco, and although she doesn't really do a lot of platforming on her own, her levels are still pretty sick. We get to do the riding levels with her and a new cat character named Pura, as well as doing the pirate levels on a jet ski. As for Crash, we did the normal platforming levels, as well as for the first time, controlling him underwater, and making him ride a motorcycle as well as a dino named Baby T in the prehistoric levels, which I should mention also serve as the chase levels. You also get to ride an airplane with both Crash and Coco in their respective levels, so that's also neat. We, of course, also have to face a lot of new obstacles and enemies in this game, some of which vary depending on the time era you're in, which is both pretty amusing and cool. As for the bosses, there's a couple that come back from the previous game, such as Tiny, Engine, and Neo Cortex, but we also got two new faces, the previously mentioned Trophy, and also arguably one of the best characters in the entire franchise, Dingodile. There's two new big things that set this game apart from previous Crash games. The first one are power-ups, which you get after you beat each boss in the game. These are the Super Belly Flop, which allows you to destroy crates with iron in them, although you could do that in Crash 2 with a normal belly flop, so a bit pointless maybe? There's also even better power-ups, such as the double jump, which will allow us to reach higher places, the super spin, which will keep us in the air for a bit longer in case we encounter things like big pits, the fruit bazooka, which will allow us to fire Wumpa fruit to a specific part of the level, although we will barely use this power-up as there's just a couple levels that actually require you to fire Wumpa fruit at a long distance to break boxes. And finally, the speed shoes, which will allow us to run faster by keeping pressed the R2 button. And I know what you're thinking, but Manny, why would I need to go faster in a level I was already in? Well, there's a good reason why actually. The other big new thing added to this game are the relics. And these relics are obtained through a new mode called the Time Trial. After you get the crystal in every level in a game and beat it, when you come back you'll see a golden clock at the start of said level. Once you collect it, you'll start at the Time Trial mode, in which you'll need to get to the end of the level in the smallest amount of time possible. It wouldn't surprise me if this game inspired what we know now as speedruns. And look, in all honesty, you don't really need the speed shoes to get the relics, but you'll definitely do a lot better with them. And believe me, you'll need this, and I'll tell you exactly why. You see, there's three types of relics, the Sapphire, Gold, and Platinum one. No, this is not Pokemon. Each level has a set time that you'll need to get to the end before it reaches set time to get at least a Sapphire relic. And if you manage to get even better times, you can get the Gold and Platinum relic, with the latter being the best relic you can get in each level. So it's basically like Sapphire is the easy one, Gold is the medium difficulty one, and Platinum is the hardest one. And you may also think, oh well, I'll just collect the Sapphire relic from each level then. That should do the trick, right? Well, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you need to at least get the Gold relic in each level to get 100% completion. And with some levels, this may not be too bad, but there are some that you will definitely have a hard time with, but we'll get to that later. Relics aside, the gems also make a comeback in this level. Crates, colored and secret gems, as well as death routes, make a comeback. And the 5-color gem path, just like last game, is also in the final level in this game, Buglight. So yeah, if you wanna do any percent, then you won't really need to worry too much about collecting the relics and gems, as they are not really necessary for the normal ending. But if you're looking for 100%, you're in for a ride, quite literally. You see, this game has a lot of secret levels, and just like in Crash 2, the means to get to them can be very cryptic. Like the level Hot Cocoa, which is a level that you can only access if you hit a random alien sign in the motorcycle level Road Crash. And both this level and the other secret jet ski level, Ski Crazed, are like the normal jet ski levels, except these are set in hell. And also, in Ski Crazed, you are put right beside the end of the level, but it is surrounded by nitros, so you'll need to find the green iron exclamation mark crate before you can even get out. And if you think this level couldn't get any harder, well, let me tell you this. In the jet ski levels, there's normally an arrow that indicates you where you must go to get to the end of the level, because of how wide the water area can be. Even Hot Cocoa has this arrow. Ski Crazed, however, doesn't have it, so you're left at your own mercy. There's also the secret level Ehippus Rex, which is a level in which you'll need to ride Baby T all the way to the very end where there's a secret gem. Of course, you can also accidentally lose Baby T and do it with only Crash, but it's a lot harder if I do say so myself. And the way to access this level is nothing short of batshit crazy. First, you need to get the yellow gem on the alternative version of the level Hangem High. We'll talk about that later. Then go to the yellow gem path in the level Dynamite, and then during the Triceratops chase part in said path, you need to get caught by exactly the second pterodactyl that you see, and instead of losing a life, you'll end up in Ehippus Rex. I'm sorry, but how the fuck do you come up with this and expect anyone to figure it out right away? This has to be the most cryptic way to get into a level in a Crash game I've ever seen. It's still cool nonetheless. So, I mentioned earlier that there's an alternative version of a level, and I wanna talk about that real quick. This is all connected with the relics as well, so bear with me. You see, relics are not just a collectible item, but they actually unlock an extra warp room that you actually access to as soon as you get 5 relics, with the first level actually being Ski Crazed. But you can also unlock the alternative versions of the levels Hangem Hike and Future Frenzy, which have both the yellow and green gems respectively, and also a couple more new levels that are Area 51 and Rings of Power. So now you know what inspired that Netflix show to have that name. So yeah, getting 100% in this game is definitely no easy task. Not as hard as the first game for sure, but also definitely harder than Crash 2. And after we get 100%, of course, we can get a real ending. The final boss fight against Cortex and Uka Uka is the same regardless of how much stuff you have collected. But it's what happens afterwards that's different. Because once you collected everything and then beat Neocortex, both them and Uka Uka are sent back to the past, where we can see both Baby Neocortex and Baby N Trophy fighting for who gets to keep Uka Uka. A pretty amusing ending if you ask me. And for those of you who have played Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time, yes, this true ending is where that game starts. Get your mind blown, nerds. Personally, I do love this game. It was one of my first games that I played as a kid, and even though I never completed it back then, it was truly a joy to have experienced it as a kid and to have nostalgia for it. And of course, many years later as I grew up, being able to finally complete it was truly rewarding and a great experience. But I also feel like some of the cryptic aspects and difficulty trying to get everything are something that I'm not a huge fan of. It's kinda like how Banjo-Tooie was essentially Banjo-Kazooie, but 1,000 times bigger and with a shitload of content that felt too overwhelming for the player. If you play that game, you know what I'm talking about. Either way, Crash 3 is a great game, but I personally prefer Crash 2, so I'll just go ahead and put this one on B tier. And that's it for the original Crash trilogy on the PS1. The other two games that I'll be covering are spin-offs, and are not platformers at all. Well, at least one of them has some platforming elements, but this next game is honestly not only my favorite Crash Bandicoot game, but also my favorite PS1 game in general. A game that I hold dear and near to my heart, and brings me nothing but joy every time I play it. Ladies and gentlemen, Crash Team Racing. This game is fucking amazing. This was one of the first games I've ever played, and 23 years after it was initially released, it still holds up pretty well, I would say. I first played this when I was a 7-year-old bastard, and I loved it so much. Like, all the time whenever I came back home from school, all I wanted to do was to just play the heck out of this game. I think we all have that one game. But nostalgia aside, I wanna talk to you about this game and its plot. Because this is the first game where the main villain is not Neo Cortex, but a new character named Nitrous Oxide, an alien whose purpose is to turn planet Earth into a parking lot. Why? Because why the hell not? I mean, with this look, you would think that he would at least try to make everybody on Earth his slave. But no, just turn the Earth into a parking lot for no reason. And after this, everyone, meaning both good and bad characters from the franchise, get together for the first time to try and defeat Oxide, which leads us to the main mode in the game, the Adventure Mode. Pretty much just like Diddy Kong Racing, the Adventure Mode here is composed by 4 hub worlds, plus an extra hub world with some special tracks, Gem World Cups, and the final battle with Oxide. So each hub world has 4 normal tracks, a battle track, and a boss fight. The hub worlds, of course, are also themed, and this is the first open world Crash game in terms of hub worlds, as you can just drive around them as freely as you want. And I gotta tell you man, the tracks in this game are so fucking good. Each track in this game is unique. Just the way they look and our design is pretty great for the PS1 era. You got many themes in these tracks including beach, snow, ice, ruins, space, etc. Most of the themes come from Crash 2 though, so if you're expecting an Egyptian or Arabian themed track, you sadly won't get that in this game. Although those themes did make it into the remake of this game, Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled as free DLCs. Anyway, back to Adventure Mode. To progress in each area, you need to first get the trophy in the 4 tracks of each hub world, and then face the boss of said hub world. And contrary to what you may think, these bosses do not actually work for Oxide, they're also against him. But they think that you, the player, don't have what it takes to beat him, so they want to test your skill and power first. There's 4 bosses that you must fight before Oxide, which are Ripperoo, Papu Papu, Komodo Joe, and Pinstripe, which is also the first time in which all of them speak and have some sort of personality. Each boss has a unique characteristic to them. For example, Ripperoo leaves a lot of TNTs, Pinstripe hits you with bombs from behind and ahead. You get the idea. And after beating each boss, you get a key that will lead you into the next hub world, and with 4 keys you will be able to face Oxide. And what will you know, you'll need to complete everything to get the true ending here as well, but not before beating him a first time, as he doesn't actually leave the earth the first time. So in order for him to actually leave, we need to collect a bunch of old and new stuff. First, there's a new collectible item, the CTR tokens, which are the red, yellow, green, blue, and purple ones, which we get by completing the CTR challenge, in which we collect the letters C, T, and R scattered in specific spots across the tracks. And some of them you'll need to actually get good to collect cause they ain't easy. But you don't just get them in the normal tracks. I mentioned previously that there's also battle tracks in the hub worlds. And although you don't actually battle in them, you do need to collect 20 crystals before the time runs out to get the purple CTR tokens. And while some of them may seem easy, others can be a real pain in the tail, like Rampage Ruins. Fuck that level. But after you get 4 tokens of each color, you can unlock the gem cups, with each cup rewarding you with a color gem if you beat it. And not only that, it also unlocks the bosses in the character roster, so you can play with them outside of Adventure Mode. Well, all except one. Sadly, due to space limitations, Oxide couldn't become a playable character in the final game, even though he was planned to be from the very beginning. I think you can still play as him with a ROM hack though. Anyway, moving on, we also can collect relics, and just like in Crash 3, these are obtained with time trials in which you need to do 3 laps in the shortest amount of time, with the help of number crates that will stop the time for a specific amount of seconds, depending on the number of the crate. The color of the relic, just like in the last game, will depend on the time you get. Luckily though, you don't need to get the gold relics this time around to beat the game 100%. So once you get all the gems and the relics, you need to do the 2 extra levels in the hub world where Oxide is. which are Slide Coliseum and a new unlockable level with the same theme, Turbo Track. You have to get the relic in both of those tracks and then go to Oxide again to beat him. And speaking a little bit about the Oxide race and also Pinstripe, I am so grateful that their boss battles take place in both Oxide Station and Hot Air Skyway respectively, because these two tracks have two of the best non-intentional shortcuts in the entire game, and if you get good enough at them, you'll see yourself using them a lot. But if you end up not using the shortcut in Oxide Station, you'll also notice that there's a part that literally uses space physics in the cars, and that, my friends, is really neat. Anyway, once we beat Oxide a second time, he gives up and goes back to his planet, and then we get credits with an epilogue just like in Crash 1. And if it wasn't enough, we also get a pretty cool scrapbook showing concept art and pictures of the making of every Crash game up to CTR. And that's the adventure mode, but there's many other modes you can use to enjoy this game, just like the single race mode, in which you can do whatever track you want just for fun. The Cup mode, in which you get 4 cups with 4 tracks each, and finally the Battle mode, in which, as the name implies, you can battle your friends if you got anyone over at your house to play with. Sadly, I don't think anyone will use this anymore physically, and will rather do it online. And let me tell you, if CTR Nitro Fuel came out on PC, I would have played the shit out of that. Goddammit Activision, why didn't you release it on PC, you ding-dongs? Either way, there are some battle courses available which are also the ones that you get during adventure mode, but there are some unlockable ones as well that you get if you complete the cups in their hardest difficulty, which you also need to unlock by beating the cups in easy and normal mode. Or, you could always go the shameless route and just use cheat codes for everything, which I kinda understand. In fact, I did that as well in the past. But you can't use a cheat code to experience the joy of going through adventure mode to unlock stuff, or can you? I think there's actually one single character that you can unlock only with a cheat code, and that's Pentapenguin. Who the heck is Pentapenguin, you may ask? Well, it's this guy, and also this guy. Yes, it's the random generic penguin from previous Crash games. They made him a character, for some reason. Best idea ever! The developers also apparently forgot to remove a placeholder audio file for this character from the final game, which is honestly pretty fucking amazing. There's also some stuff I don't think I will ever bother doing in the game, which are the End Trophy and Oxide Ghost races, which apparently are hard as fuck and you need some math skills in order to beat them. And I'm not really a big Ghost racing fan, so I just skipped this part. Sorry everybody. But yeah, that's Crash Team Racing. Again, it's a game that is, in my opinion, one of the best PS1 games ever made, and also a game that I feel really paved the way for many kart racing games that will come in the future. I love this game more than both Mario Kart 64 and Diddy Kong Racing. It is just that good. So if you haven't played it yet, go do it. It is truly an amazing experience, and again, it's my favorite Crash Bandicoot game of all time. So, not thinking it twice, S tier. Well, this is it, boys and girls. We made it to the final game. And you may think, well, what is the last PS1 Crash game? It must be a good game, right? You have no idea what's coming. Crash Bash is certainly a game, and I'm gonna be straightforward with you right now. I don't like this game. I mean, sure, it's not entirely awful and it has some actual fun moments, but it's mostly just a bad game. But let's break it down from the beginning before going into the main course here. This is a party game, most likely inspired by Mario Party, as it's composed of a bunch of minigames with different types of mechanics and goals. But the thing here is that Crash Bash is also not so much like Mario Party, and I don't mean it as in being its own thing. It's more like it tried to be Mario Party so hard, but it ended up being a shit party.
shit sandwich.
For starters, you don't actually battle in a board with other 3 people. Just straight up jump into the minigames, regardless of which mode you choose. The minigames also repeat their own gimmick across different themes. For example, there are crate throwing minigames, which are my favorite by the way, which take place on the jungle, future, snow, and so on, as well as pogo minigames that take place in the jungle, desert, construction place, you get the idea. These are the same type of minigame with a small aspect changed. And aside from the crate and the polar minigames, they aren't really that much fun to play. The ones I despise the most are, without a doubt, the ball and tank ones, with the kart racing being one I used to hate because of the shitty controls. Don't get me wrong, they are still shitty, but at least now I got used to them, so it's not like I hate this type of minigame as much as the other ones. So yeah, to summarize the minigames, there's the crate ones in which you throw various types of crates to your enemies, the polar ones in which you have to ride a polar bear and have to throw the enemies down the area, the pogo ones in which you must fill up squares of your color and then break an exclamation mark crate to get points, the ball ones in which you need to move on a spaceship left and right to not let balls get past your area, which is pretty reminiscent of Pong/Breakout. The tank minigames, in which you have to drive a tank around and have to defeat your opponents with a fire weapon, mines, and bombs. And then there's some more random minigames with different mechanics, such as ringing, in which you need to break balloons of your color while being in a moving clockwork engine. I also hate this minigame by the way. So with all of that said, let's talk about the adventure mode because that's really the only mode worth talking about in this shithole of a game. So the plot here is that Aku Aku and Uka Uka are, unsurprisingly, arguing to see who's the best between the two of them, and they decide to settle it by sending one of their friends and minions into a minigame rush, because that's how you settle a long-lasting rivalry, am I right? But since Uka Uka outnumbers Aku Aku when it comes to minions, the latter decides to take both Dingodile and Tiny into the good side for them to be equal. Although he could have easily gone with Pura or Polar, so I don't know why they didn't include them in the game. Also, as you may have seen, there's a brand new character in this game called Rillaru, which actually, and this shouldn't be surprising if you know the internet, became one of the most popular and requested Crash games to reappear in a future game. And for almost 20 years, Rillaru didn't appear in another Crash game until Crash Team Racing Nitro Fuel, where he not only appeared once, but twice. Yeah, you heard that right. There was his first appearance with a modern look that pissed some people off, and that's why Activision decided to add another quote-unquote fixed version of the character, while also keeping the previous modern version. So basically, a really obscure character of the franchise went from never appearing in the games for a long time to appearing 2 times in a recent game. That's pretty nuts if you ask me. Either way, the character that we end up selecting for adventure mode will define which mask will give us tips, as well as which ending we will get, with Crash, Coco, Tiny, and Dingodile being in the good team, and Cortex, Brio, Koala Kong, and Rillaru being in the evil team. And from there on out, our adventure starts. And what would you know, the warp rooms here suck! You can only move left and right and up to the minigames, and spin, for some reason. So it's pretty limited. Not as limited as Crash 1, but still, although I would say that the fact the warp rooms have themes is a cool thing, so at least I'll give it that. But anyway, we start with the minigames, and we need to beat them and get trophies. Easy, right? Well, not quite. You see, a normal game will just make you win the minigame and then progress through the next one. But this game actually went a bit further, so guess what you need to do to win a trophy? Just one trophy. You need to beat the minigame 3 times. Yep, that's right, not 1, not 2, but 3 times. And some of these minigames just go on forever, and you'll end up sick of them. What is worse is that the enemies can also win up to 3 times, which could make you be there for a lot longer than you should. The types of minigames that this happened to me the most were the ball games, which is why I ended up hating them so much, with Skyballs being easily the worst ball minigame in the entire game. I will even argue that this could be the worst minigame in general. So yeah, whatever. We beat all the minigames 3 times, or even more depending on how ruthless your opponents are. We beat the first boss, Papu Papu, and then we move on to the second one. Shouldn't be too bad now that we know what to do, right? It gets worse, dude. So, to unlock the first boss, we only need to get the trophies, which is simple enough. But to access the second boss, you need to collect trophies, and also gems and crystals. Yes, mandatory extra item collecting, my favorite thing ever. Okay, so the gems and crystals work differently in this game, as you may have figured out already. To get gems, you need to beat the level with a bigger time limit, or a handicap, so it's pretty much the same minigame but with that little change. While with the crystals, there's a new added challenge that you must get through to get it. But also, and only in the crystal challenges, the level looks completely different. Why is this specifically in the crystal challenge? I have no idea. Most of the time, the way the level changes the way it looks doesn't even have anything to do with the challenge itself. So while it's kinda cool, it's also really just pointless. So yeah, we now have to get 3 collectibles to progress through the game, and each warp room increases the number of trophies, gems, and crystals you need to unlock the next boss. So you'll definitely need to keep grinding them if you want to at the very least get any percent. And let me tell you, any percent is as far as anyone should play this game. I'm not joking. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about the bosses. Because they're not really that bad. I mean, they can get frustrating, yeah, but they're not the worst part of this game by any means whatsoever. We got Papu Papu, a giant polar bear, the Komodo brothers, and the final boss, which I'll reveal later. I guess if I had to say what my least favorite boss fight was though, I would say the Komodo brothers, in which you're in a tank and need to first destroy the machine in front of you and then beat both of the bros. Luckily though, after you destroy the machine, you get a checkpoint, so you won't have to destroy it again if you die after said part. Still a shitty boss fight though. And after you get through all of that, you finally get to the final boss, which, surprise surprise, is none other than Oxide again. Except this time, he doesn't really have a reason to be the final boss. He is never mentioned in the story. He's just there because the game needed yet again a final boss that wasn't Cortex, so they just put him there. And this is also where I discovered one of the most ridiculous but also amazing aspects of this game. You see, this game has a weird thing where every time you fail a minigame, the difficulty decreases. I was wondering if this was real for a while, until I heard someone talk about it while playing the game, and then it clicked. Although it definitely makes you lose some time, failing a minigame several times makes it, indeed, get easier, and you can just get through it as if it was nothing. But again, it is so incredibly cryptic to come to this realization. You will just think that you suddenly got all good and lucky in the minigame, when it's the game feeling pity for you and making it easy, so you don't have to struggle anymore. I honestly don't know if I should feel thankful or insulted. So yeah, after you beat Oxide, you get either the good or bad ending, and after that, you access a brand new warp room? Okay, so what's the deal here? Well, to access the minigames in the extra warp room, you need to, of course, get even more gems and crystals, as well as a new collectible in the game, the relics. Oh neat, the relics. So does that mean I need to time trial the minigames or something? Nope, it means that you must win every minigame 3 times in a row without your opponents winning the game a single time. Because if they do, it's game over and you have to redo the whole minigame again.
No. No. No.
Needless to say, I didn't bother with this. I didn't bother trying to 200%, yes, 200% this game, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. This is easily the worst Crash game on the PS1. I mean, to be fair, this was the first Crash game that wasn't developed by Naughty Dog, as they left the franchise for good after making the masterpiece that was Crash Team Racing. So who knows what this game would have been like if Naughty Dog stayed on the boat. Better? Yeah, most likely. And it's heartbreaking to come to terms with the fact that we will never know. This game could have been so much better, like a board feature could have definitely been a way better feature than a shit adventure mode in my opinion, and having to beat each minigame 3 times was also something I did not like. I wanted to just beat a minigame once and then move on, you know? Even Sonic Shuffle, also one of the worst party games of all time, did the board thing. They didn't do it well, but at least they tried. Hell, I will even say I will enjoy Sonic Shuffle more than Crash Bash. Overall though, this game was a huge disappointment, with a couple decent moments that sadly didn't do a lot for me. Not even nostalgia could save this game, as I got stuck in Dot Dash when I was a kid and never got to experience the rest of the game, but I think I would have hated it anyway. So, what else can be said really? F tier. And there you have it folks, every PS1 Crash game played, reviewed, and ranked in a single video. As I said before, Crash Bandicoot is my favorite franchise, and it remains so to this day. These games, well, at least most of them, shape the way I see and enjoy gaming nowadays, and gave me some of the best days of my life as a kid. Don't get me wrong, they still do, but being a kid and playing Crash Bandicoot after school definitely hits different than playing it as an adult in an emulator. It's just a feeling that can never be replicated, you know? And it's also the reason why when I play a new retro game and enjoy it, such as Gex Enter the Gecko, easily one of my new favorite retro games that I played for the first time in 2021, when I was already a 24-year-old grown-ass dude, I tend to say, man, I wish I could have played this as a kid. Because the nostalgia factor is really important in my opinion when it comes to video games. But yeah, I really wanted to dedicate a special video to my favorite franchise, so I hope you enjoyed it. And it goes without saying that this is the longest and hardest video I've ever made. And I guess it justifies me being away for so long. I just came to the realization that I'd rather make actually good videos that take a while rather than daily videos that suck, you know? So I hope that this video left exactly that impression, because that's really my goal. So if you enjoyed this video, you can of course like, subscribe and all of that, but you can now also support me on Patreon if you want. I will be uploading both early videos and also exclusive content in there eventually. And it's really a good way for people to support me if you enjoy what you saw, and it will definitely motivate me to do more stuff like this. I worked on this whole video myself. I recorded most of the gameplay, did the script, recording, and video editing myself. I do not have a team, so again, if you wanna support this kind of content that I plan on keep doing, then feel free to head there, and support is always appreciated and also always optional, so thank you very much. But yeah, that's really it for this video. Thank you so much for watching everybody, I appreciate it, I hope you're having a good day, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye.